So when we decide to create a game, we start off with a design. So we've chosen which book to do. So we decided in this case to choose Oliver Twist. We decided we can choose some classical fairy tales. We could do the classics like Shakespeare or Dickens, or we could just create our own story, which would have been reasonable. But then earlier this year, Michael Gove, the Education Secretary, said that children should be introduced to the classics from an early age. It should be compulsory. But then some academics said Shakespeare and Dickens are too difficult for children. So we saw an opportunity there whereby we could give them an introduction to Dickens that would be on their level, and we can use new technology like the iPad that they can read the story, but they can also play the story out as well. And this is what children are used to. So why did we choose Oliver Twist? Primarily, it involves children, so the children can associate with it. So there's a good start. But it's a classic Dickens. I mean, when people say, name 2 Dickens books, you would probably say Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol. Mm-hmm. So we thought, well, it's not Christmas, let's do Oliver Twist. And we would go through the story, and then we would compress the story into about 15 or 16 pages, and try and get the pure essence of the story. And from that we would then make a character list. So Oliver Twist has a lot of characters. It probably has about 30 characters or so, and that's just too many. One, for 16 pages, that would confuse children, and secondly, the story would be too complex. You just wouldn't be able to simplify it enough. So we've had to cut parts of the story out, and we've had to kind of reduce the number of characters, and also primarily from a technological point of view, the characters take up memory, and that the device has to use, and they also take up like processing power. So we have to reduce it from that point, and we probably take some of the gore out as well. In this, Sykes doesn't hang himself. He jumps into the River Thames, which is probably a bit more palatable for children. You know, when they do read Dickens, when they get older, they're not frightened by it. You know, they're not frightened by the complexity of the story. They already know what's going to happen. You know, but when they actually read the actual Dickens text itself and how well it's written, and the way the story twists and turns, each page has a snippet of Dickens text anyway. So for each kind of page, we've got a relevant snippet. They can see how good the Dickens text is, and how good a writer he is, especially compared to us. But he is considered to be the best writer of the 19th century. So we're happy to be seen as perhaps the second best. That's fine. And we also have history text as well. So each page has a little bit of history about 19th century Britain.
To put the story into context.
Yeah, just to support it into context. So how children were treated, how women were treated, and what few rights they had. Things like anybody could adopt a child just like that. There was no legal process. How bad the workhouses were, how badly children and people were mistreated there, and also how that changed over time. Parliament, something would happen, and a child would die climbing a chimney, but then Parliament would act on that, and then they would create laws. So we create a series of pages of the story, and then we decide, okay, so what's going to be on this page? So, for example, Oliver Twist, an orphan. What's going to be on page 1? Well, okay, we'll have Oliver in front of the orphanage with Mrs. Mann and Mr. Bumble, and we'll just have Oliver all looking dejected and lonely, and these two horrible people standing next to him, overbearing, and we'll just try and give the children who are reading it. It's obvious that this is quite a stark kind of situation. It's not good. where's it going to go from here? But it's also quite simple as well. You've just got to, it's a bad situation. You've got this poor little boy, and these people are being horrible to him. So for each page, we decide, okay, what we're going to have, and we try and kind of reach a crescendo where it just gets worse and worse and worse, and we just make it starker and starker and starker until you start to get good characters appearing, and suddenly we introduce more colour into the scenes. We decided to end with a kind of railway children type ending, with all the characters waving as they kind of wave goodbye, and finally the story ends and Oliver is finally happy.
So once you've laid out the story like you have there, what's the next stage then in the process?
The next stage would be the artist comes up with concepts for the art. So he would come up with character models, some ideas for sketches for backgrounds, and that would normally be an iterative process whereby he would originally come up with an idea and would say, does this fit in with, say, me as the designer, does this fit in with what I have in my head? And so you may make a few adjustments here and there, and also from a technological point of view, how difficult would it be to implement that across several pages? You decide on a basic design, and then we decided to kind of work one page at a time, whereby the artist would create a background, and then he'd create some characters, and as Will said, he found his groove. So he just found that the art would then flow after a while. In terms of the style of the art, I was quite adamant that we should do it. All the characters are actually 3D, but I wanted it to look 2D, because we feel that just 3D doesn't give that kind of sense of emotion and attachment to the characters. It can look quite blunt. You can't really associate the characters because it's incredibly hard to do such detailed models in 3D that a device like this could render. So we decided to do it in 2D but using 3D technology, and Will came up. I was kind of saying, imagine it's like paper and we're just putting paper stuff together, and Will kind of came up with the idea of using almost like riveted paper models, which was a stroke of genius. As a non-artist, I had an idea in my head how it was going to work, how it was going to look, and then Will would then come up with ideas. And sometimes I just think, well, I don't really like that, but I'm going to trust him. But I figure he's got better taste than me anyway in terms of art, and a lot of the things that he came up with, and it kind of when I first saw it, I wasn't sure whether that was the right thing. But I thought no, and it grew on me, and I felt it was quite bold at times. With a character, it's Bill Sykes, who typically in films is like a wiry chap. He's almost like a grown up artful dodger. Whereas Will in here, he did him as a big, bulky, mean kind of thuggish fellow.
Yeah.
And at first I thought, having seen the films and read the book, I think is that Sykes? But it kind of, I feel after a while I felt it worked, because a lot of the other characters are quite wiry in this thing. To have a contrasting figure. I mean, he clearly looks menacing, so I feel that worked. So yeah, we then export this as a 3D model, and in the code, you load it as a 3D model into a 3D world. And you place it wherever you want, and the code would handle things like it would take the animations from the 3D model and it would actually play them, on the simulator or on the device. Yeah, the code is quite complex. Each of these are is a file containing code, and typically there would be probably about 500 to 1,000 lines of code per file.
Right.
And the code would handle things like playing sounds, drawing drawing the 2D kind of gooey objects, which are things like the buttons and stuff, drawing the 3D scene, rendering the text, handling logic with puzzles in the game, so things like tapping the rat, or in later scenes you have puzzles such as how do you get Oliver into the house? So you tap him, the woman comes out, he jumps back in. So yeah, he can't get in the house. So we'd have some kind of some logic that kind of handles the puzzle. So you think, aha, turn the light off. Oliver goes in the house, and and he's in, and Sykes runs off. The lady comes out with a shotgun, fires him, and Oliver falls over.
So it's all very interactive.
Yes. We wanted to actually give the children a way of playing out the story as well. So you read the story, but by playing out the story, one, it's a puzzle, so it gives it a bit of added value. But secondly, it's a way of playing out the puzzle themselves.
Yeah.
In a future version, we might also like to have a mode whereby each scene has a set of kind of characters, and you can actually almost like fuzzy felts kind of take those characters and move them about on the screen, and
that'd be
perhaps
good.
play with that yourself. Yeah, and perhaps have some simple animations and things, or allow the children to kind of create a scene themselves.
Oh right, so they'd actually have a hand in kind of shaping the story as well. Yeah.
And that way they would understand the story as well.
And you're hoping to bring narration into them as well?
Yeah, we're going to have narration in the next version, which should be out in a couple of weeks' time. So we've got a professional narrator for that. A rather nice lady from the north. The narration was quite interesting. We originally thought, should we have a grandfatherly type voice? We're thinking of, I don't know if you've seen the film The Princess Bride, but you have Peter Falks, the guy who played Columbo, and he reads this story to his to his grandson, and we thought, let's have this kind of this grandfatherly voice, but we found it too menacing, and because it's quite a dark story, we found it too oppressive, too menacing. And even though these guys are fantastic who are doing this narration, they were really good. So we were quite surprised, but I said, look, let's try a female voice. So we got some ladies to audition, and they found it much better, much lighter, especially considering a lot of the story is quite dark. Yeah. So that kind of works. So yeah, definitely doing Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, probably, or maybe A Midsummer Night's Dream. One of the difficulties is how we get these stories over to the children. Shakespeare can be quite gory, or it can be quite complex, quite a complex storyline. So one of the challenges we face, as well as the kind of the design of the application of the imagery, is how we can safely get this story over to children without them either being confused, or whether their parents or Apple as the distributors would kind of not be happy with characters being stabbed or poisoned. So that's a challenge we face, but I think we're going to do it. We should be fine, I think.
Yeah, either way, it's kind of making the more complex adult
that's the
classics accessible to children.
That's the important thing.